Good evening, welcome. My name is Lori Chesley, and I am very proud to be the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Grand Rapids Community College. Welcome to this annual event. You may not realize, but GRCC has been involved in ArtPrize as long as there has been an ArtPrize. We've hosted venues for artists, and we've held this panel discussion every year. And so welcome back, maybe is what I should say. I hope you're aware, this year the college is hosting two venues. One is the Spectrum Theater lobby, so if you didn't stop and have a look at the artwork, please do on your way out. The other venue on our campus is on the 4th floor of the main building, and it's the Collins Art Gallery. Something that you also may be aware of or not, this year marks GRCC's centennial. We are 100 years old this year. Applause. All right. Yeah. And in fact, we're the 6th oldest community college in the country. And as you might imagine, a 100th birthday gives us all sort of time to reflect. And I've had that opportunity as well, although I've only personally been at the college for 10 years, which is a meager 1/10 of its history. I've had the cause to reflect a little bit too. And I have to say that it is not at all surprising to me that GRCC has made it to 100 years when I consider the faculty and staff at this institution, and especially, frankly, the faculty and staff in the performing and the visual arts. I think they're fantastic. I think they set the bar. I think they're great teachers. I know they're great teachers. I know that they're wonderful artists and scholars. I know that our programs are high quality and rigorous, and I know that our students succeed. And so, again, not at all surprising to me to be 100 years old. And not at all surprising that somebody will be standing here or somewhere in the virtual world in 200 years praising the folks that have gone before them. I want to take a minute to especially thank the visual arts faculty who are here tonight. And so I'll ask them, would you please stand? Please. Filippo. All right, thank you. Let's give him a hand. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I appreciate these faculty. I do thank you for coming tonight, and I am now going to turn over the microphone to someone who actually knows a whole lot about art. I'm an English teacher, so I have nothing to offer in that area, except I know that our faculty are great, and one of those faculty is Nick Antonakis. He's the department head of visual arts. Nick, thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much, Lori. Once again, we're set for a wonderful evening, and I want to welcome you too to this event. Thank you for spending your time with us. I'm the moderator of the evening, and it's my pleasure to introduce our artists on this panel discussion. They will have 10 minutes each to show you their work and to talk about it. And then afterward, we'll have a chance to ask them questions. Without further ado, I will start my introductions with the first artist directly to my left, and they will also present in this order that I will introduce them. So Mark Hanavan is right next to me, and he did his graduate studies at the College of Design, Art, Architecture, and Planning at the University of Cincinnati. He teaches foundation classes at the Art Institute of Ohio, Cincinnati. As an assistant professor of art, he has been awarded Teacher of the Year in 2010 and Most Inspiring Professor in 2014 by Cincinnati Magazine. And next to Mark, we have Sarah Lothian. She is a fine art photographer, currently teaching at Kendall College of Art and Design. And Sarah was chosen by the Grand Rapids Art Museum as one of the top ArtPrize 2013 artists. and is included in the ArtPrize Encore exhibition. Sarah received her Master of Fine Arts degree in photography from Indiana University. And finally, to our right, we have Robert Sparrow Jones. He received his MFA from the Hofberger School of Painting at the Maryland Institute College of Art. He continued his professional career as an assistant professor of painting in Athens, Georgia, and more recently at Kendall College of Art and Design. He was awarded an Air Fellowship at Can Serrat in Spain, and his paintings have been reviewed in Oxford American Magazine and many other publications. Let's give him a warm welcome. A hand of applause, please. And we'll have Mark start the presentation.
Okay, so thanks for having us. I'm going to try to get through as much as I can here. We only have 10 minutes, and I think my PowerPoint may be a little long, but this is my piece in the Collins Gallery. It's entitled Inherent Value. So I thought I'd use the time to maybe talk about some pieces that led up to this, even as far back as graduate school. So let's see how much we can get through. Next slide. So this is pretty typical of what I was doing in undergraduate and into graduate school. I was really taken with portraits and figurative works from Lucian Freud and Francis Bacon and the likes. And but when you get into graduate school, as you guys are probably starting to realize, you get pushed to talk more about, you know, what drives your work. We're working on formal skills in drawing and painting, but also, you know, what's the crux of it? What's the meaning behind the work, and what are you truly trying to get at? So in critiques, I would talk a lot about family history in this area that I was from, of Ross, and there was this uranium processing plant and the history of that, and contamination, higher levels of cancer, a family, a lot of blue-collar workers, very proud, very tied in with the land, very religious. And my professors looked at my figure paintings, hearing those stories, and they said, that's very interesting what you're talking about, but none of that's going on in your work. So, and I looked and saw that that was true, so it made me kind of reevaluate. Next slide. So I got away from the figure and painting and drawing altogether and just started taking photographs of the area and the materials and the people, the yard ornamentation. There was an object in particular in my grandmother's trailer park yard where it was this beer can windmill, and I thought there was something really interesting about it, how this object with its two-dimensional and its three-dimensional surface of this beer can, it had this function that started to tell us about the owner of this object, you know, social, political, economic beliefs, even if they didn't realize that these things in their yard were doing that. I didn't know exactly how that would all flesh out in my work eventually, but I started paying attention to these objects and making things in a way that they might make things, sewing, cutting, very labor intensive. Next slide. So here's one of those pieces where I took this log out of a nearby river and I would cut this and hinge it where you could unfold it onto the gallery floor and then fold it back into its original form. Next slide. This is a series of pillows that I hand embroidered with sayings or stories that meant something to me, familial stories. And they were hung at eye level and lit, sort of like Stations of the Cross as you move through them. Next slide. And finally, towards the end of my graduate studies, this all kind of led to a piece where, thinking about the yard ornamentation, the history of the area, I created this cast paper piece. This piece was done right before the final. Next slide. So I cast my entire body using these yard ornamentations. And next slide. And I sloshed this with a Victory Brown microcrystalline wax and got the positive. And the next slide. And then paper mache this with articles from that area, from Ross, when the government acquired that land for the uranium processing plant. Here's a detail, and if you get close, you could start reading titles like Richest Farmland in County, Soon to Produce for Freedom. I even projected imagery of grottos and yard ornamentation onto the surface of this. About 2 days before my thesis show, the whole thing burned up in a kiln. So you guys will have experiences like this if you haven't already. And at first it was it set me back, but as I finished the piece, I realized it was one of those happy accidents that even made it stronger, as it looked a little too new and it was aged and distressed. Next slide. So here's the final piece, which weighs only about 2 pounds. You can pick it up with 2 fingers. And I titled it Sower, and thinking of Van Gogh's Sower, where he's, throwing these seeds into the field. This is the three-eyed frog, if you will, that would come out of this experience of this land, this uranium processing plant, this kitschy yard ornamentation, the investigation of the ground. And the object in the hand becomes utilitarian. What's the function of it? Is you pulling it out of the ground or planting it in? Next slide. And next slide. So after graduate school, I went back to 2D. I was actually a painting major, and I teach at the college where I teach now, the Art Institute. I'm the drawing instructor. And students would bring in objects for a drawing class, and somebody brought in this little clown, and there was just something about this object. I think as I look back now, because this is a few years back, what I was really doing in this series was kind of sharpening my formal skills, but there's also some ideas with it that I think carried over even into the work today. If we go to the next slide, one thing you'll notice with these is the doll in this case, or the subject, is usually revealed to us, facing us, but they're also hiding in a way. When we think of current social medias like Facebook and such, that we can learn new things, we can reveal ourselves, but it's almost simultaneously hiding and just showing people what we want them to see. Next slide. This is one of the final pieces from that. Next slide. So a lot of my works, quite frankly, start as demos for the students. So this was just a piece that they had to draw the skeleton one day. And a lot of those demos just stay right there. They're just, some work out, some don't. But every once in a while, as the instructors probably know, there's something about doing demos where the pressure's kind of on, but that right brain takes over, and strikingly, a lot of them kind of turn out, or there's something that just strikes us about them that makes me want to take it a little bit further. I think just controlling medium on paper was interesting with this one, but it kind of led to the next few. So I went back to portraiture, being away from it for a long time, but now I feel like I was, these are maybe technically, proficient, and definitely investigating light as it goes over the surface of something. But there's kind of a deeper layer, and I think it's simple in some of these, like the title of this is Surface. So we can definitely think about the surface of the paper as we come to it with charcoal and the mark making, the surface of the gentleman's face and the way light renders over these surfaces. But I started looking at definitions of a lot of my titles, and one of the definitions of surface is to come into light, which seemed interesting to me. Next slide. I teach a lot of figure drawing to the animation students. This again started as a demo. But as I worked it, there was just something interesting in the negation of the face in lieu of the body. And it seems like there's always that constant battle between our physical selves and our mental selves. Next slide. This is just a few examples of a lot of the quick gesture drawings that we do. So these next 3 slides are examples of just 60-second gesture drawings. I think just in my practice of drawing, some of them speak to me. I'll see something that I want to capture. But just the act of line on paper and just capturing that moment and getting it down. So these are a lot just about the line and the movement. Totally different type of drawing than the 40, 50-hour, slower, bigger renderings. Next slide. This is one of the animation students that I teach. And just being surrounded by, and they say, draw what you know, draw what's around you, being surrounded by these animation students are kind of a interesting subculture with their hats and glasses, and they don't fit a lot of the typical molds. And as I was working on this picture over, I noticed the octopus necklace, and I titled this Defense Mechanisms. And I started thinking, well, what's the defense mechanisms of this animal? What's the defense mechanisms of this student as an animal? And even beyond that, drawing for me is drawing a defense mechanism that I use. Another thing about this piece was the oval. definitely repetition of form with the oval and the glasses and just picking up on that. But it seemed like a nice contrast, a real feminine element that kind of comes into the ArtPrize piece eventually. Next slide. This is one piece that I think really resonated with me going back to the graduate work. You know, just that two-dimensional and three-dimensional, you know, these drawings having a three-dimensional presence in our world. You know, one of my favorite artists was actually Donald Judd, the minimalist, and just how he was sensitive as these objects exist as an object in themselves, and how we're sensitive to that as artists. So it's actually portraits of a couple colleagues of mine, but just this, we learn a lot about every pore and little details, but they have this 7-mile stare, and there's this disconnection. So they're facing each other, and there's like this conversation wants to happen, but there's some disconnect. And as I frame these in these old antique display cases, it seemed to be an interesting contrast. I titled it Knowing, and again, in a day of social media and all these things where we seemingly can make all these great connections, unfortunately we're dealing with a lot of people being disconnected or isolated, which I think is another theme that kind of threads through all the work. Next slide. I hadn't done a lot of sculpture since graduate school, and even back then, that one, is just a few sculptural pieces. I definitely didn't consider myself a sculptor. Part of the animation curriculum and program, they actually don't just draw from the figure, but they sculpt a figure. So this, again, was a demo for the students because they had to do a bust. So this is the bust that I started to do just to show them some techniques and how they could go about it. But there's something about how the model's hair was bound that interests me. And I even took a lot of reference photos and had her kind of lean forward. There's kind of a movement. And next slide. And as I looked up the definition for bound, this was kind of an interesting one because it starts kind of derogatory and then turns more positive. So you can think of bound as in slavery or something that's being tied down or restrained. But then bound is also to leap forward. And then the final definition is a predetermined point of destination, which I thought was really interesting. Next slide. And again, and next slide, sorry. And I like this contrast again between this 2D and the 3D, the reflection, this moving forward. But then conversely, there's the reflection that's moving the exact opposite way. And the way she's physically bound, the sculpture's physically bound that material to that metal plate in the background. Next slide. So this is one of the pieces that's part of the triptych in ArtPrize. And it was a portrait of my wife I actually did a few years ago. And again, it's just, rendering light and form, but there's something about that disconnection, that kind of longing that I think is in all the pieces. Next slide. And then I did one of her mother. And next slide. And then finally my daughter. We were down in Disney, and I don't know, just like that beer can windmill, I just saw my daughter with her face painted and these sequence ears and, the happiest place in the world. But then all of a sudden this disconnection, so I created this piece where all of a sudden it's three-dimensional and they reflect into each other. So I think a lot of my concerns about how we have this need to connect, this yearning, but we're also these solitary, isolated creatures. It's all kind of simultaneously represented in a piece. And this is kind of the one shot where this piece wouldn't exist if it wasn't in proximity to the other two images. So there's that physical relationship that becomes a metaphor for the relationships in real life. And I know I've probably gone a little long. Yeah. So there is a little video that shows this thing in 3 dimensions, but we can skip that if we're out of time.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
I might have to. Sarah?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My work, I'm going to talk specifically about the piece that's hanging in the Collins Art Gallery over at GRCC. You can go. Next slide, please. I started doing a lot of work based on pharmaceuticals, health, just the health industry in general, consumption, and it had a lot of interest to me because of my family history. This is a photograph of the main street in my small town, and in the center of the frame is the pharmacy that my family used to own and operate. So a lot of my inspiration comes from this and sort of me wanting to learn about my own history. Next slide, please. So, like I said, we have a history of medicine in the family. My father is the 5th generation pharmacist. So it all started with my great-great-great-grandfather, so 3 greats, that he originally started as a pharmacist and then later became a physician in town. But so 5 generations, that's kind of a hefty, that's a lot to live up to, I think, as you pass the time between generations. Let's go to the next slide. These are a couple photographs that I found of my family. So as I'm sort of researching, I found it really, I had a lot of enjoyment just from learning a lot about my ancestors, who I've never met. This is my grandfather, who passed away when my father was a teenager. So there's a lot that's not said about him, but we have these photographs that I can sort of commemorate to him. Next slide, please. So I have a lot of pride in sort of my history and where I come from and what my family does. And so did the community. This is a photograph of my great-grandfather receiving an award for his excellent service to the public and unselfish devotion to the community. So in a small town, it's sort of everyone really appreciates each other, especially when everyone knows everyone. It's sort of the atmosphere that you're living around. Next slide. These are a couple of photographs that I took, and they are actual prescriptions that were saved for the pharmacy records, and they were placed inside these beautiful illustrations in this book that had these illustrations, which really were very unrelated to each other. It just happened to be the book they put them in for keeping their records. But I really enjoy how the men in the photograph sort of become the pharmacist. They become William Lothian. And the one on the right, your right, if you look closely in the background, there's a woman with a camera, and I just sort of, it was this happy accident, I guess, that I found, and it works really nicely for me as a self-portrait in a way. So it's me photographing the pharmacist and the prescriptions, and it has a little bit more meaning to me. Next slide, please. So all of the objects in the photographs are from the pharmacy. So this one in particular is a mortar and pestle that was used to compound the medications. So if you're unfamiliar about how everything was done in the past in terms of dispensing medication, everything was mixed. Nothing was in pill form yet. So they had to mix and compound each medicine for each patient. So everything was very, each patient would get their very own sort of dosage and strength for their prescription. Everything was made on hand. Let's go next slide. So these, again, are more objects that are found from the pharmacy that I set up in my studio as little still lifes. So these bottles are actually really tiny, so maybe a couple inches, if that. And as you notice, they're very scary too, in a sense. they have these one-word warnings, poison, that just are very fearful in a way. The labeling is very different than what we see today on our prescriptions. All they needed was one word, where today you'll see pamphlets and side effects listed, and all this information that comes along with you, where the pharmacy, inside all the pharmacist sees is this one word, poison. So this work is, in a way, very nostalgic of not only my history, but also the process that the pharmacist had to go through to compound the medications. It's a balance between the very helpful and also the very harmful. So on the left side, you see these awards that were given to the pharmacy for their excellent service and for what they were doing for the community. But on the right, you see these bottles that very clearly state poison, and their ingredients are very harmful if taken in large quantities. This one in particular, strychnine, was used to cure a lot of human ailments in the compounding, but today you find that specific ingredient in pesticides. You can find it in rodent killer. So a lot of the ingredients has changed and advanced over the years, which I find really interesting, in how rapidly everything is changing. Next slide, please. So a lot of great skill, because we're dealing with very toxic sort of chemicals. Great skill is needed, very high level of education in chemistry and math, and where it's very, very different than today, where not saying that it doesn't take a lot of knowledge to be a pharmacist today, but it's changed dramatically. So you have to get the proper dosage correct, mixing. It took a lot more time and effort in the process. All right, next slide. So this is also another example of how the ingredients have changed over the years, where you can specifically see the ingredients. So this work overall, it's sort of my way of continuing on the generation as a pharmacist. I really had no interest in chemistry or math or anything scientific. I'm sure in college I really avoided those classes and tried to stay far away from them. But I felt the need to sort of continue on in some way, and I really I wanted to learn more about my family and where they came from, and sort of what went into the process. And I've learned a lot of crazy stories about the business and just talking to family members about it. And overall, as a photographer, I was also just really interested in these really beautiful objects that were just hanging around in my parents' attic. And what are we doing with these? We need to do something and sort of capture that memory in these little still lifes that I've created. I think that's it. I do have one more slide. This is just a couple images of the photographs that I have in the Graham currently for ArtPrize Encore. So if you're over at the Graham, go check them out. They're on the 4th floor.
Thank you. And now we have Robert.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Robert Sparrow Jones. And next slide. When I started off, when I was coming into thinking I wanted to become an artist, the thing that affected me most was I really loved movies, and And me and my father would watch black and white movies late into the night because you could only find them on television before video. And so I fell in love with old monster movies that were done in black and white, like Bela Lugosi. And then I also came into, more deep movies like Truffaut and Alfred Hitchcock. And these are movies that really stuck with me. And I really wanted to be a director. That's what I wanted to do. Okay, next slide. And so the closest thing that I could come to movie making was photography. And when I was old enough, I worked as in the grocery store and saved up enough money and bought a 35 millimeter camera because this was as close as I could get to creating movies. Okay, next slide. And so some of the photographers I was really into were street photographers like Mary Ellen Mark and Diane Arbus and Robert Frank and the likes. Next. And next. And so I was interested in trying to, make movies because I realized that I was also interested in telling some kind of a story. Our house was always filled with books, and we were encouraged to read, though we were never forced to read. My father was an English teacher, and so the story and narrative was real important to me. When I got into undergrad, I wanted to study photography. I also took creative writing fiction as a minor, and then one of my teachers discovered that I could render a little bit and said, you should take printmaking. It's a really interesting form of art making. And I was a little trepidatious, and so I tried it out and found that I took a liking to it because it was a black and white form of two-dimensional art to a black and white form. It was a multiple to a multiple, but then it did something really different, and it was being real physical with the work. And lithography is a very physical process. You've got to grind down these Bavarian limestones, and it takes forever, and they're real heavy, and you've got to constantly keep it wet. But it's a very beautiful and physical process. Next. And next. I came into painting a little bit later, and there's something about it that the first I had when I went to art school undergrad, my aunt gave me this Winsor Newton set of oil paints, and I carried it with me all through undergrad. But I never used it because I was a little too shy about it. I was a little shy about being a painter. I didn't know what that entailed. Although the first time that I set my paintbrush to paint, it became the summation of everything that I wanted in art, which was storytelling. It was being physical with the materials, and then it was also this new thing, which was the paint, something about the paint that gave it an automatic emotional content. It's like suddenly it became deeper, and it was through color that it did that. And I was real shy about color and didn't know much about it. Next. And so these works they're coming from the influence of photography. I love photographs. I still do, and now I'm really trying to discover how to use color. And when I look at these older paintings, next, and next, I could see that they're not really adept at color yet. They look like sepia tone photographs. And that's because that was the thing that I was interested in, and that was the thing that I was really studying. And next. So when I got to grad school, much later in life, I really used it as a workshop for myself to really study painting and really study color theory, something that I didn't really know much about. Next. And so in these paintings, I'm still thinking about storytelling, and I was trying to, and also I was studying creative writing at Johns Hopkins when I was studying at MICA in Baltimore at the same time, because I was still interested in writing. I was still interested in trying to tell a story. But these, next one, these are, to me, telling that story in a different way. They don't seem to me linear. They seem to be more about time and space. Next. And so they contain, through the materials movement, they're created by many thin layers of paint. It's really hard to see in a slide form or online, but I really came to know Vermeer and his quality of creating many thin layers. But I'm doing it in a real expressive way in this case. Next. Here's a close-up. So there's more details. They're real expressive, and some of the artists I was thinking about during this time were the abstract expressionists. My teacher at MICA was Grace Hardigan, and she was one of the last remaining abstract expressionists living. And because I was interested in that era, and I was interested in all of those artists, it was really wonderful to get that information from her firsthand. Next. And so my work became real expressive. Next. And next. So I was still thinking about storytelling. You know, it's something I'm very interested in. But I also realized that it was continually throughout my work, it was always about someone in the depths of nature. And this came right from my childhood. Being a boy, we used to go into the woods, during the summer in the morning, and we had to be back by 5 o'clock, and we were allowed to just go in the woods, and it was a real safe place. At the same time, where I grew up in Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania, the whole area that was this beautiful woods and ponds, where it was being strip mined for coal, for fuel. Next. And so I started to really think about that. Like, I noticed it was happening. It was about, I'm interested in nature and being in nature, and also a bit of a kind of a subtle activist in environmentalism. And so this is kind of my way of showing that. Next. So here, the people are having, or these, they're like my friends, we're having a good time and kind of not realizing what's happening around us, right? They're lost at sea. Next. And next one. And next. Also, I thought a really great metaphor was these tree houses that we used to make as young boys. In our small town in Pennsylvania, we had these beautiful old houses, just like here in Grand Rapids, except that it was the 70s and 80s, so they were just kind of stripping them down and putting in smaller windows to be efficient. And but I loved all that old stuff, and so we would take those old windows and doors, and we would build humongous tree houses with them. Next. And so these were like places of safety that were like, they suggested a place of strength, yet very fragile. Next. And next. And so this is my painting in the Collins Gallery. And I think that this references, again, they're slowly working up, and I'm kind of fine-tuning them to a place that I think I want to say where it's more of a metaphor, but to me, it's what we've lost and what we don't know will be lost later on, that we'll have to rebuild from nothing, or from memories, or from DNA, or what have you, things that are lost because of our actions. And so that's what that one is about.
Wonderful. Thank you to all the artists. And now we have a little bit of time to ask some questions. And maybe I'll get that part of the program started by first of all asking Sarah about your artistic influences. You talked about reasons for making the work, the body of work that you showed us. But I'm not sure I heard about the artists who influenced your work. So if you could say a word or two about that.
I look at a lot of artists, not necessarily photographers, but what influenced the work was really, well, there's the obvious Damien Hirst who recreates the pharmacy. That was sort of the initial artist that you sort of have to mention in terms of pharmacy work. But I did reading. It was mostly just the history, but then I would sort of dug into other artists who sort of did similar things in that, just to be aware of that. But it was mostly, it all started with the history, and as well just thinking about my own health and how that has changed, and the consumption of pharmaceuticals throughout history.
Thank you. Excellent. And I'd like to ask each one of the artists to mention a little bit more about their process. I know that Robert was talking about some thin layers. I'd like to hear if there is glazing involved in your paintings and whatever else you do with your process, and the same thing with Sarah and the same thing with Mark. If you could.
Yeah, I do, through studying about painting and the history of painting, I really adopted working in a real layered form. But it was interesting when I started to think about how to paint properly, which I really didn't know how to do that. And I came into graduate school, and I started a painting the way I thought maybe an old master would start through my research and reading. And Grace came in and she looked at the painting, and it was like the first week she came in, she looked at it, and I could just see the bewilderment in her face, and she's like, "Do you paint like this?" And I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Don't paint like that. Scrape it off." So I had to wipe it all off and start the way I usually paint. But I still adopt those methods, just in a real contemporary way, through looking at the white surface of the canvas and then working in layers through color, which is a little different.
My process, because of the materials I'm working with, really don't know the contents exactly, because if you notice, some of the labels were torn off. Who knows what's in those bottles after being stored for years and years. But a lot of my work deals with still life, and not only with this project, but with sort of objects that are dirty, and for instance, animal parts, or but I'm sort of cautious with that, and lots of rubber gloves. But that's the process in terms of setting up still life. So I have my own studio in my home, and it's just, I have lots of time to sort of set up and arrange and anything that's needed.
As far as process and the way I work, I was thinking of when I was back in graduate school, and I was telling all those stories, and the instructor was looking at my figure paintings. They were pretty poorly done at the time, and he said, "I don't see any of that there." But at the same time, I was working on this painting cart that I would carry around in my classes, and then I would constantly add stuff to it, like a pegboard, because I would need to hold my tools there, and then I would put a coffee cup inserted into a drilled out hole, because I'd put my paintbrushes there. I was actually a painting major. And then I had a stereo in there, and it was just crazy. They must have thought I was nuts. It was kind of like that, with the dancing monkey and the drums and everything else. And I don't know when it would happen, but I'd stop working on this thing that I thought was art. And I would just start building this thing, you know. And he said, well, I don't see any of what you're talking about there and how your dad builds things and how you build things in this history. But then he looked over at that cart and he was like, I see it there, you know. And so I tried to start paying attention to things that I don't necessarily consider art or making art. Now, I know that doesn't seem like the way I'm working because there's these very highly rendered images. I don't know if one of your professors have said to you, like, just do the work, and sometimes the ideas come out of the work. I just try to, and not that I always do this, but I try to pay attention more to that. So even this final piece, they're actually, I didn't talk about this before, but the final ArtPrize piece, they're actually framed in what are security mirrors, because I like that oval in the student picture and the femininity of that and how that would contrast against some of the more serious ideas. And then I started looking up the cost of oval glass, and they started talking about $500–600. And I was like, well, what about these security mirrors that are like in grocery stores and whatever? And I looked that up, and they're $100, you know. So I got those, and I'd strip the mirror out of the inside. And I don't think that I was thinking ahead of how those reflections would work. So there was another happy accident as I started framing these things, and they're sitting in my studio, and then I just look over, and there it is, you know. So just hopefully just paying attention to everything, and then that comes back into the work. I feel myself going a little. The sculptors would always give me a hard time in college, saying, "You're a sculptor trapped in a painter's body. You need to come over to the dark side." So I really want to push more of that 3D, 2D in it, but.
Excellent, thank you. I hope I got the ball rolling on questions. So I'd like to see some of our students and audience ask some questions of the artists. So I'll come down with a mic, and you'll be able to put forth your question. Anyone? Back there?
Hi, my question is for Sarah. Was photography your first love, or did you try other mediums first?
Actually, in undergraduate, I started off as a graphic design major and took the required photography class that the intro to darkroom, I think it was, black and white. And I fell in love. So, and the professor was like, "Why are you not a photo major? What are you doing in the graphic design department?" But no, mainly I started on the computer. So if you look at a lot of my work, it tends to be very clean, lots of lines, lots of grids throughout. It's really based on that sort of, that thought in the back of my mind saying that you need to, it's the designer in me, really. So yes, I have a degree in graphic design as well as photography. So. Yeah.
Another question?
Okay. This is more a general question about ArtPrize. So, you know, you are in our competition, and the 2D jurors actually was in the gallery, spent a lot of time looking at your work, and you're not being selected. So, what do you feel about this? Can you tell us something about your experience about ArtPrize? This is general consideration about ArtPrize again.
Yeah, well, I don't know about, but no, that's all right. I enter things all the time, and I have 4 kids and married and teaching full time, and I was making work, but I wasn't really getting it out there. And about 3-4 years ago, I kind of made a commitment to myself. One of the reasons I'm here, I was like, I'm just get this work out and do shows. So I show at least 6 or 7 shows a year, and I've been not accepted in just as many things as I've been accepted to. You guys will experience the same thing, and you know, sometimes you do take it personal, but you just realize that you can never really control what they're looking for, you know, and hopefully, I had a professor once, he said, never ever enter an art competition because it has nothing to do with your work and whether the work's good. I mean, we all like to be selected and feel or whatever. But you really got to protect yourself from that. Protect yourself from when you're not selected, and even from when you are selected, and getting this heady whatever, and just really trying to focus on the work. So
I honestly, I don't do it for the ArtPrize money. I do it for myself. When creating anything that I do, I think if you constantly think about what other people are going to think and how other people are going to judge your work, you're not really fulfilling your own needs as an artist. And I treat it the same as ArtPrize. I don't expect to be in the top 20, but if I am, excellent. But I'm creating work for me, and it sounds really selfish, but I think as an artist, you really need to embrace that.
I mean, I really feel the same way of both of those sentiments. That's for sure. And then, and this is my first ArtPrize. So when I did get out and start looking at the work around town, I was really impressed by a lot of it. I mean, there's some really fantastic pieces that just blew me away, and then there was a lot of pieces that just weren't that good. But and I don't know where mine lies, but yeah.
Another question here.
Great work, guys. I really do like your work a lot, and I love the presentations. But I was curious if you could talk about. I think, Mark, you went through the process of like how you evolved through. You actually all pretty much went through that. But how many things are still in your studio that have yet to see the light of day? And I think it's important for the students to understand that not everything you make is going to be an ArtPrize or wherever on a wall somewhere. Can you talk about how failure is a part of your work?
There's a lot of failure, but there's a lot of good things that come from that. I have this goal. It doesn't seem like a lot, but I try to make at least one really awesome photo a month. By the end of the year, you get 12 photos. You get a new portfolio. But in order to get that one really awesome photo, you have to knock out the bad ones. And I've had some really bad ideas that I know, even as I'm doing it, I know that I don't like it at all. I see lots of images in my head right now, but in order to work through that, you have to, a good one comes along. Maybe it's just a change, for me, a change in lighting, a change in my composition, or just maybe I move an object in a different place. But you really have to sort of work through that. Otherwise, if you're not always working, you sort of hit that wall.
Yeah, one thing I like when I'm teaching my figure drawing classes is because I do lots of demos just right there and just drawing, and I just, and I like that they see that the three gestures that were put up. Those are the three best ones out of like 100. We do them every day, just tons of them. And sometimes they come out and sometimes they don't. And you can't see that, you get done and then I'll move away from it and then I'll come back and I'll realize this proportion's way off or, something crazy that you can't see. So I think it's good for the students to see that we're all just people in a studio with a stick of dirt and paper and just, going to it, Yeah, but lots of pieces that I've started that I thought had something interesting to it, and they just didn't. They just stopped. Lots of half-done drawings in my studio.
Lots of failure, that's for sure. I don't know if maybe it's just me that when I'm making a painting or drawing or something, and if it just comes right out and I make it in a few days and it's easy, those paintings that I look back on are my least favorite, or I see them as later on my least successful pieces. It always seems like those paintings where I'm working on them and then I get stuck and then I move ahead with it, and then in moving ahead with it, I completely fail with it, and it feels like I have to break the painting and then fix it, and then it breaks again. There's something wrong. I gotta fix it again, and those are those works. It's like the failure in those works make it. Something about it just makes them really stand out.
You know, another thing is that even the ones that are in the gallery or whatever aren't necessarily like, oh, these are great successes or whatever. You know, I think about this safe place that you're talking about in this tree house and whatever. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but I don't think any of my works really, because a lot of the times the thing that we're trying to capture or grasp, they're like these, not really these tangible things. They're more obscure ideas about safety and security or, you know, truth or whatever. That's why it's good to do these kind of things. Or when I'm sitting in my studio and I see all the pieces, I see those threads going through and I'm like, yeah, together they all kind of work. And I see that thing that I'm trying to get at, but you know, no one in itself really kind of does it. So, but we keep going, you know, because you're just passionate about, you know, making the next one and going with the next ideas.
We have time for one more question.
Our question is for all of you guys. What do you guys usually do when you get, you know, stuck on something you're working on really hard? Do you guys like have a special thing you do to help you get back in the mood to doing it or something?
Yeah, boy, I run. I'm a runner, and there's nothing better than just calling it quits and just going for a 5-mile run and just clearing the head out. And something about, you know, getting real physical and just to get you out of your head really helps out. Otherwise, you got to step away from the work you're doing, no matter what it is. If it's a painting or a film or animation or a drawing, get away from it, step away, come back to it fresh, turn it upside down, look at it from a different point of view, or even better, invite a friend in who's never seen it before to say some things about it, and you could really hear what you need to change by just getting a fresh set of eyes coming in there, and reading it the wrong way is so helpful.
That's a really good point. It's always a lot of help to have someone else look at your work. And even if you're stuck, even if you're still stuck at the end of it, it's always good to have another opinion. You can move on to the next project. And who knows, something might come along. Maybe you watched a film or something you're inspired by later down the road, and you're like, oh, that's what I need to do. That's what that was missing. So really finding inspiration in your everyday.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I might have the opposite problem where I can't turn it off. Like I'm always thinking about these drawings or whatever. And with 4 kids and whatever, you obviously have to turn it off and get to the soccer game and do whatever else. But I teach a lot of applied arts, like graphic design, and it's interesting for them. Like, how do they work through something like that? As they're designing this toilet paper roll that they could care less about or whatever, you know? And how do they find the inspiration to make something exciting happen, even when they're not excited about it, you know. So I like the workout thing. I usually go and work out. I don't know, but the blood going or whatever, just these ideas just come, you know. So everybody go do a 5-mile run.
Well, it seems I lied to you a moment ago. We'll take one more question. We have a request here.
My question's for Mark. You seem to like using a lot of high contrast monochrome, and I was wondering if you did any works that have high contrast color.
I was actually a painting major, and I teach color theory a million times over the past 10 years. I love color, but it's kind of like what you were saying. It has so much emotional impact and baggage to it that it's one of the reasons I strip it out, because I think that longing or that wanting or that isolation is kind of heightened by the black and white. I think about that a lot. It's like, why black and white? Why am I so drawn to this, you know? The high contrast, I always like all the old Caravaggio's and this, you know, chiaroscuro, and it's almost like there's this battle going on between this good and evil, this, and as we know in a lot of things, as soon as you get something, you usually lose something else, So and I see work like his, and it makes me want to pick up the brushes again and get the color out. So another interesting is I actually do work with color. It's super, super compressed. But even my black and white mediums, I'll go from like titanium whites to flake whites, because those aren't all charcoal. There's actually India ink and acrylic paints, but just that really small compression. Even different black charcoals will have a cooler feel, and some will be warmer, and I'll use that to just slightly pop something, forward physically, or to have a feel to it.
Excellent. Thank you very much to the artists. Let's give a warm hand to them. We have come to the end of our program, and I'd like to remind everybody to get out there and look at more ArtPrize in our city, but also to join us for a reception in the lobby of our theater tonight. So directly after this, the artists will be there, and we can ask them more questions and enjoy some punch and some cookies too. Thank you very much.